Holy cow, when did that happen? It's June. It's June, people. It's June 1st, 2026. I'm Pat Kreitlow. Welcome to another beautiful morning up north here, live from Lake Wissota. Hope you had a great weekend. Nice to have you along. Here's just a little sneak peek at things that I'm working on for Up North News, along with the rest of the team as well. On this Monday, May 29th. No, it didn't fix that. Monday, June 1st. See what happens when you just read off anything? Use a teleprompter. He'll read it. Monday, June 1st, 155 days until the November election, 71 days until the August primary. It is Pride Month, and it is June Dairy Month. So a lot of things going on for both of those. For Pride Month, there are events going on all over Wisconsin. Head over to upnorthnewswi.com to find that article with lots of links to activities. Later this morning, if it hasn't happened already, I think a little later on it happens, Governor Tony Evers will raise the pride flag over the state capitol for his 8th and final year as governor. Whether a pride flag will fly above the capitol next year at this time is up to you, the voters. It's also June Dairy Month, and that is your excuse to go get yourself to a dairy breakfast. Maybe more than one, because there's such good food there. Hey, Rob, nice to have you here. Yep, meteorological summer has arrived, so has June Dairy Month. For that one, head over to wisconsindairy.org. Again, wisconsindairy.org, and you will find a comprehensive list of more than 50 different events, most of them dairy breakfasts, but not all of them. So take a look. Okay, just a quick update today as we keep you up to speed on the race to be Wisconsin's next governor. We'll have a little bit about stories our team is working on for Up North News. And Speaker Robin Vos has lost control of his caucus. And so we'll talk about why he has demonstrated on the Sunday talk show circuit, why he's not going to be able to put together a new surplus spending package before he is removed from the Speaker's office at the end of the year. First, a reminder to get signed up for our Thursday evening newsletter about Wisconsin politics, our question of the week, and more. Also get signed up for that daily newsletter put together by Ellie Bordeaux, who also has a new video series called What's Brewing. In it, she visits various bars and coffee shops. Basically, if it's brewing in Wisconsin, she's going to take a look at it and tell you what makes it so unique and worthwhile. Rob says it's birthday week. Hey, Rob, congratulations. Happy birthday. Let's see. And Jim says another beautiful morning here in Appleton. That is great to know as well. Let's see. Brewers are home tonight after a weekend in Houston where they took 2 out of 3. They play the San Francisco Giants tonight, tomorrow night, Wednesday night, and then Thursday afternoon. So a 4-game homestand with the San Francisco Giants. And of course, everybody's talking about Jacob Misiorowski and what a month of May he had. He went 5-0. I think he allowed only 1 extra base hit the entire month. Had a couple of outings where he went 7 innings, which is phenomenal in this day and age. He has 108 strikeouts for the season. That tops Major League Baseball. And his ERA, his earned run average for the month of May is 0.23. You don't have to know a lot about baseball stats to know that's pretty good. 0.23 for Misiorowski. Again, occasionally has a rough first inning and then settles down most of the time. Certainly lately, the way that it was mentioned on the broadcast yesterday, is that he's become less of a thrower and more of a pitcher. And he did that yesterday where he had to make adjustments mid-game to not just throw 103 mile an hour fastballs, but to get that curveball where he wanted it to go. And he did. So he just continues to be fun to watch. Brewers were in last place at the start of May. They're in first place now. They are 4 games up in the National League Central Division. A lot of baseball yet to be played, but it was a good month of May. In the headlines, this is a big day in the race for Wisconsin's next governor. It is the day that nominating petitions are due. 5:00 today, I believe, is the final deadline. And according to the morning update from WisPolitics, and they shared the Wisconsin Elections Commission list, 4 Democrats have turned in their signatures to this point: Mandela Barnes, Joel Brennan, Francesca Hong, and Kelda Roys, as has Republican Tom Tiffany. Now, that means today is the deadline for Sarah Rodriguez, Missy Hughes, and David Crowley to get their petitions in. Now, by the way, you might think, well, those are all the candidates for governor. Maybe there are one, maybe two other minor vanity candidates. It's actually a lot more than that. There were 30 people who expressed an interest at some point, according to a listing from the Wisconsin Elections Commission. 15 actually filed paperwork with the State Elections Commission formally declaring their candidacy. Only 9 have filed the paperwork about their economic interests so that we can know about potential conflicts of interest. And again, the deadline for the rest is 5 o'clock. And then comes a review of the signatures because, again, not all signatures are necessarily valid for various reasons. And you want to make sure they have enough signatures to qualify for the ballot. That's when we'll know who is officially called a real candidate for governor, as well as seats for Congress and the legislature, the statewide offices, lieutenant governor, attorney general, state treasurer, and secretary of state. So in the next day or two, we will be sharing those lists with you through Up North News. I think I might swear at this next story, so I'm just warning you ahead of time. In Minnesota over the weekend, both parties held their state conventions. One was in Rochester, one was in Duluth. I forget who was where. Both conventions had a moment of silence, but for very different reasons. At the Democratic convention, the DFLers had a moment of silence for Melissa Hortman, the former longtime Speaker of the Minnesota House, who was murdered along with her husband nearly a year ago. They had a moment of silence for her at the Democratic convention. The Republicans also had a moment of silence at their convention for Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin is the Minneapolis cop who murdered George Floyd, put his knee on his neck and left it there until he was nearly dead and died. That Derek Chauvin, who's in prison. The Republicans gathered at the state convention in Minnesota, held a moment of silence for that asshole. My tolerance for politically involved Republicans, not my Republican friends, neighbors, family members, but the ones who choose to get involved in politics and pull this kind of shit. I've just about reached the end of my tolerance level on that. And, once upon a time, before I really got politically involved, people really appreciated that I was fairly either nonpartisan or bipartisan, talking about the issues, talking about the people. I had interviewed good people on both sides of the political aisle. But as time has gone by and the Republican Party that we once knew is all but gone, the people who remain, so many of them are really just starting to sicken me at this point. And it makes it really hard for the people in the middle. And there's all kinds who say, y'all just need to talk to each other. You need to get along better. You need to see the humanity in each other. I get what you're saying, but I'll say it again. At the Democratic convention, they had a moment of silence for Melissa Hortman. At the Republican convention, they had a moment of silence for Derek Chauvin. Let's move on to another story here. State Senator Julian Bradley was interviewed by what appears to be a conservative news site, and he has a soundbite in there. I didn't take it down. I won't play it for you here, but basically, I just wanted to point out his quote. He says the Wisconsin Supreme Court. This is Republican State Senator Julian Bradley of the Milwaukee suburb of Franklin. He says the Wisconsin Supreme Court has a liberal majority due to court packing. No, that's democracy. The people voted. But again, it's not a surprise, sadly, that a Republican politician these days is bothered by the outcomes of democracy and would be open to trying to rig elections that they can't win based on the issues or based on their records. Why they have still not, Senator Bradley and others, approved a process to allow for the early processing of absentee ballots, why they continue to fight against drop boxes, why they continue looking for ways to disenfranchise voters. So it's not surprising, but I thought you should know that in that district, Republican State Senator Julian Bradley says the Supreme Court's liberal majority is due to court packing. That's how he describes elections and the will of Wisconsin voters. Exactly, Alicia. They were voted in after a lot of work on a lot of campaigns, and frankly, a lot of campaign contributions from both sides of the political spectrum. Free elections in all cases, and in how many of them over the past 10 years that we've had to deal with the whole MAGA Trump thing, the progressive candidates have stomped on the conservative ones because you can't gerrymander a state. So when the whole state gets to vote, we've seen what they want on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And now that we have fair maps for all legislative districts, we're going to get a feel for what all Wisconsin voters want in terms of the makeup of their legislature. And they are ready for a Wisconsin State Senate no longer led by Devin LeMahieu, who's retiring. And they are ready for a Wisconsin State Assembly no longer led by Speaker Robin Vos, who is also stepping down, not running for re-election. Well, he was on Upfront over the weekend through WISN TV, and he says the legislature should come back and try again to pass a surplus spending bill, that could provide some property tax relief by providing some aid to schools, maybe do some other tax relief in other areas like overtime or tips. Also put an infusion of cash into special education, which is breaking the budget of school districts all around Wisconsin. Robin Vos says everybody ought to come back and we should put together something. His quote was, "Let's put some pressure on these politicians to get it done." Here's the problem. When asked who he blames for this last deal failing, he said, quote, "Oh, there's no doubt it's Senate Republicans." And then he refers to Senate Democrats as irrelevant. Now, I'm just going to quote our friend Dan Schaefer from the recombobulation area for the response, because the response is spot on. Dan writes, "That's obviously absurd, since they were critical, Senate Democrats, to getting the state budget passed last year, and their votes are clearly needed for this. Vos is proving himself to be deserving of blame here too." End quote. You are now seeing exactly how Robin Vos expected everything to operate, with 100% Republican unity, marching in lockstep with whatever leadership wanted. And it worked for him. It worked for many years until it didn't. Now, for the most part, his coalition or his caucus started to fracture because there were some Republicans who wanted more extreme measures, like deeper cuts, do less for schools. But now, thanks to fairer maps, there are also some Republicans in more competitive districts who wanted a more moderate approach. Either way, when a leader realizes they don't have the total control that they used to, they can either try to browbeat the dissidents or they can try to get votes from the other side of the aisle. Vos can no longer do the former, and he's never been interested in the latter. He has always wanted things to pass with 0 Democratic votes and to refer to them as irrelevant. And that dog just ain't hunting anymore. And so that's why he is showing himself to the door before he gets booted out. His time has come and gone. Alicia notes here, I say, sure, come back and negotiate a better bill that won't put us into a deficit. And he says, she says as well, that's the opposite of what my own legislator is saying. All right, well, should they come back? You can argue the point. And again, I'll echo Dan's point that the session calendar for the legislature, it's an artificial construct of the Republicans' own making. For years, they have ended sessions earlier than necessary, taking long taxpayer-funded vacations instead of getting some actual work done. So yes, they could come back to Madison and try to make a deal that's more bipartisan. And that would allow most of the incumbents in both parties to say they worked together to make something better. So vote for me because look what I did, in June or July of an election year. Look, I won't be mad if that's what happens. Of course not. But I don't expect it to happen. And frankly, I I wouldn't let it happen anymore because now it's just a political opportunity for Republicans to try to look like they give a damn about something they haven't cared about in 16 years. They have not given a rat's ass about our public schools. Certainly not about property tax relief. They have kicked the can to school districts, forcing the referendums, forcing higher property taxes. And then they're allowed to say, well, look, we held the line. It was those naughty school districts that did all of this. No, they've been kicking the can and the public is catching on. And while I understand it will be painful for school districts to go another year like this, passing a one-time aid bill, that's not the same as true reform. And true reform either is not going to get the votes to pass, or Robin Vos and Devin LeMahieu just won't bring it up for a vote. They just won't negotiate that with Governor Evers. They won't. They're looking for a feel-good short-term package. And frankly, if Trump keeps steering this economy into a ditch, and that's certainly the way it looks, well, that's just going to put Democrats in the same spot as they were in 2010. Unable to fix another Republican recession, and voters blame the Democrats because they happen to be the ones in power when the Republican mismanagement really hits the fan. By the way, same thing's going to happen in 2028 because many of the cuts in Donald Trump's big bloated boondoggle, they actually haven't happened yet. They're designed to happen after this year's midterms. So if Democrats take Congress this fall and then the cuts start showing up next year, guess who's going to get blamed for those cuts in 2028? It's almost like it was designed to happen. I mean, I wish this was some kind of breaking news revelation, but this has happened again and again. The only difference is now we have more progressive media outlets and more groups that are able to communicate this to voters so that voters stop repeating a cycle that hurts them so much. So make some good choices in November. And then Democrats need to not dither. Don't do the circular firing squad. Make some bold choices next year. And then be sure to message that to voters in 2028. Unlike, what the Biden administration did and then the Harris campaign as well. Did not do nearly enough. Thought, everybody will just see all the good things they've done. It doesn't work that way. Here's Ginger Murray running for Congress saying fair maps as I'm driving to Madison to turn in my nomination papers. Let me tell you, this congressional district with all of 20 counties and part of 6 counties had people in those 6 counties so confused about which district they lived in. It really is just a shame. It is true. And as I've mentioned before, that's me. It's kind of my fault that the 7th congressional district is as kittywampus as it is, and the 3rd congressional district. For those who haven't heard the story before, after I lost my state Senate seat in 2010, I declared in early 2011 to run against Sean Duffy because Sean Duffy had been elected for the first time in 2010 because of Dave Obey's abrupt retirement. And 2010 was the Tea Party year, and Sean Duffy got elected to Congress. He beat out my Democratic colleague, Julie Lassa. And in 2012, he would be running for re-election for the first time. So I listened to the folks at the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, who were like, you got to get in now so you can raise the money. Get in now. I declared in April of 2011 for an election in November of 2012. Biggest mistake of my life. Because shortly after that is when the Republican legislature, newly under Republican control, redrew all the maps. They gerrymandered the legislative districts. They gerrymandered the shit out of the congressional districts. They took that 3rd district, which was a nice compact one running along the Mississippi River. And on the map how it's got that extension up into like Portage County and in that area, Democratic areas. They made the 3rd congressional district more Democratic. They figure Ron Kind's going to win anyway. Then, to protect Sean Duffy from me, they not only took those Democratic areas out, they took out the city of Chippewa Falls, which is just past the window over here, and a bunch of other territory. And they put St. Croix County, a Republican county, into the 7th district. Now, under the old boundaries, if Republicans had played, fair and square, or just hadn't touched the maps, or if things were different in 2010, we would not be putting up with years of Sean Duffy's foolishness as a representative, as a cabinet secretary, as a talking head on basic cable. But thanks to some diabolical remapping to protect Sean Duffy from me back in 2011, it is what it is. Now, last week, the Wisconsin Supreme Court agreed that it would hear an appeal about the congressional maps. Now, there are people, most vocal among them, Congressman Mark Pocan, who really want the Wisconsin Supreme Court to take this up right away. And I completely understand that. These congressional maps have not been fixed yet in what is at best a 50-50 state, but actually nominally more liberal than conservative when everybody gets to vote in a non-gerrymandered setting. But in a 50-50 state, the Republicans have 80% of the House seats, 6-2. I mean, 5-3 would be acceptable. 4-4 would be more in line with Wisconsin's true proportions. But it's 6-2 because the lines are still jerry-rigged from 2011. And then what the legislature did, the Republicans in charge at the time, was they changed the rules on how you could challenge gerrymandered maps. They knew their maps were shit. They knew that they wouldn't withstand a legal challenge, so they rigged the game and said, well, you can't judge shop in liberal Dane County for a judge that would then throw out our rigged maps. So now it's got to go to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court has got to appoint a 3-judge panel to hear the case first. And so that's what the Wisconsin Supreme Court, now under progressive control, did. They followed the rules and said, we've got to give this to a 3-judge panel first, when there were these 2 legal challenges that are now in place challenging the Wisconsin congressional maps. So they created 2 different 3-judge panels to hear these cases. And the 3-judge panel said, what are we supposed to do with this? It said, kick it to us, but there's nothing else in that law that the Republicans passed a decade ago that says how we're supposed to determine this, how we're supposed to determine this challenge to these congressional maps. And so we're going to punt it back to the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court said, okay, thanks for that. And then they said late last week, all right, we will hear the appeal. We will hear from, both sides in this case. Now, Congressman Pocan and many others wanted that to be an expedited matter. They wanted the progressive justices in the majority to understand that time was of the essence for the 2026 election, and that this appeal needs to be fast-tracked. God knows there were so many times when the Wisconsin Supreme Court was under conservative control that they would fast-track cases for partisan purposes. But the progressive justices here chose not to. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but I understand it and I respect their decision. But it means they will hear the appeal, but not in time to change the maps for 2026, maybe 2028. And that might be fine. But then what happens in 2030, 2 years later? We do another census. We got to redraw the maps all over again. That's what has happened to the politics of this country since the Republicans won big in 2010. The first thing everybody saw was Act 10, which came in 6 weeks after the Republicans took over in early 2011. But we also saw it in the maps. We saw it in the way they've changed the rules of the game. And in so many other ways, we are still paying the price for what the Tea Party wrought in 2010 when they told voters, we're going to be all for local control. We're all for fiscal responsibility. We have a national debt that is insanely large because of Donald Trump and Republican Congresses and what they have approved. And the legislature, local control, give me a break. As soon as they got power, they went entirely in the other direction. But we can't go back and change 2010. All we can do is make some choices in 2026 And if Democrats win majorities, make sure that in 2027, they're making those bold choices. And in 2028, they're messaging the shit out of the good things they did. And stop thinking voters will just learn it through osmosis. All right, well, that was a little bit more than I thought I'd be giving you today, but thank you, Ginger, for that comment. Let's move over to today's history lesson. Ronnie Dunn of Brooks and Dunn is 73 years old today. Pat Boone is still with us. He is 92 today. Today's Pat Boone's 92nd birthday. Oh, that reminds me, I forgot to put the note here, but let's note the passing of Frankie Valli. Frankie Valli in the Four Seasons. Late last week, he put out a statement because he was still touring. And he said he was going to cancel the rest of his tour and focus on his health. And a couple days later, he was gone. So Frankie Valli no longer with us. But Pat Boone is. Today, he turns 92. Morgan Freeman turns 89 today. Supermodel Heidi Klum is 53. Alanis Morissette is 52. Brandi Carlile and Amy Schumer were both born this day in 1981. They are 45 years old today. Actor Tom Holland is 30. And happy birthday to CNN, which began broadcasting this day in 1980. So CNN is 46 years old. One celestial birthday, and I guess I'm surprised I haven't heard more about this. Marilyn Monroe was born 100 years ago today. June 1st, 1926. Of course, died in 1962, far too young, but a legend just the same. Marilyn Monroe, the anniversary of her 100th birthday today. A lot of music notes to pass along here. 1963, Leslie Gore had the number one song with It's My Party. She had just turned 17 years old. On this day in 1968, the number one single was Mrs. Robinson by Simon and Garfunkel from the movie The Graduate. 1970, Ray Stevens had the number one song with Everything is Beautiful. I've got three different notes from this day in 1985. I know I said last week that 1984 was probably the best year in music, in my lifetime. 1985 was not far behind. On this day in 1985, Prince had the number one album. It was called Around the World in a Day, and the big hit off of there was Raspberry Beret. On that same day, 1985, a-ha released their debut album, Hunting High and Low, and of course had that song Take on Me with its unique video. And on this day in 1985, Sting released his first solo album, Beyond the Police, The Dream of the Blue Turtles. Songs that included If You Love Somebody, Set Them Free, Love is the Seventh Wave, and Fortress Around Your Heart, and more. On this day in 1999, I should say, Brad Paisley released his debut album, Who Needs Pictures, including his very first number one country hit, He Didn't Have to Be. And then finally, on this day in 2020, we mentioned Derek Chauvin and the murder of George Floyd. And on this day in 2020, protests were still happening around the country, and including one outside the White House. And Donald Trump wanted to do a photo op. So he ordered law enforcement to clear the crowd. They used tear gas and other riot control tactics that were not necessary given the peaceful demonstration that was going on at that time. But by using those tactics, it was enough to create a path for Trump and some of his staff to walk across the street to St. John's Church for a photo op where Trump held up a Bible. Trump holds up a Bible. Some people said it was upside down. Other people say it wasn't. He didn't go into the church. He didn't do anything. He held up the Bible and then walked back across the street. Just a completely fabricated photo op, because that's what he does. Question of the week is about Tom Tiffany and his comment a week ago that he could support Trump's purported slush fund for payouts for insurrectionists. Between that and all of his denials about the outcome of the 2020 presidential election, do you think that's going to hurt Tom Tiffany in his run for governor, or will it not be much of a priority for voters either way? You can head over to upnorthnewswi.com and look for our question of the week there and cast your vote, and then we'll have results in our Thursday night newsletter. All right, I haven't listed stuff off our Do Something calendar of events for a while, but there's 3 good ones here worth telling you about. Let's see, this evening, the League of Women Voters will have a virtual session called Civics Reboot starting at 6:30, where you will hear from experts on how to make a difference at the municipal and the county level. Now, for this and all the notes from our Do Something calendar, just head to the website, upnorthnewswi.com, look for that particular article, and you'll find all the links in there to sign up for all of these various events. Tomorrow in the Milwaukee area, Planned Parenthood Advocates of Wisconsin will have a Milwaukee Juneteenth volunteer session starting at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. Learn about volunteering with Planned Parenthood advocates during Milwaukee's annual Juneteenth celebration coming up in a couple of weeks. And here's a couple of notes for Thursday. On Thursday, the Fair Maps Coalition is going to have coordinated statewide rallies called Our Maps, Our Say. And it's all about calling for an independent redistricting commission to make fair maps permanent. There will be rallies on Thursday in Madison, Milwaukee, Appleton, Menominee, Janesville, Racine, Kenosha, Greene County, and Monroe, Wausau, Sheboygan, and more. You can sign up and get location details and event times by heading over to our website. And one more Thursday, the Wisconsin Conservation Voters will have a candidate education activist training for Western Wisconsin. It's a virtual training at 6 p.m. Thursday on how to speak to the gubernatorial candidates about the environmental issues that are facing our state. So you can also see some of those in our weekly newsletter from Thursday nights. Again, you can get that over at upnorthnewswi.com and watch all of our coverage in the race for Wisconsin's next governor. There we go. Quite a bit to talk to you about today, but I appreciate you being here. Keep on sharing those social media posts, and thanks for taking a little bit of time today to hear some things that I hope that make you feel empowered and not overwhelmed. Back on the right path. I'm Pat Greitlow. Have a wonderful Monday. We'll see you tomorrow for another beautiful morning up north.